Kim, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. I mean, we've just been hearing there from Suzanne about these two big asks from Zelensky. You know, he's very clear. Sanctions, she thinks that there can be some movement. And then the really tricky one is fighter jets. What's your thinking about how successful he'll be on these?
On sanctions, Aisha, I think he'll get some more sanctions, maybe to coincide with the anniversary, the first year of the war in Ukraine, 12 months on from the Russian invasion. I think the cupboard's a little bare in terms of what those sanctions are, because as the Commission spokesman just said, there's been 9 rounds already. So quite where you go for a 10th round, I'm not sure, but I'm sure we'll find something. On fighter jets, look, Sean is the expert on this. But I do think that Ben Wallace, our Defence Secretary, has a point when he says this is likely to be at best a medium or long-term aim, because what I do know from my time as National Security Advisor, these are hugely complex and, by the way, exceptionally expensive pieces of kit. I mean, a Typhoon is more than $50 million per plane, I think. And it would take quite a lot of training, whether it's 3 years or 2.5 years or whatever, to get people up to using them. So it's not something that I think you can put them, on a lorry or fly them over and they can use them next day. This is going to take much longer if governments are prepared to supply them.
Mm. And Sean, your reflections on that request. I mean, how realistic is it to expect the UK and others provide these fighter jets?
Yeah, good afternoon. I think there's a couple of points here, one of which, from a military perspective, air power, particularly Western air power, would almost certainly be decisive in this campaign. It's very difficult to see how Russia would have an answer to it if it was brought to bear. The real challenge is, of course, as Derek says, the NATO has no mandate to operate in Ukraine, and to date, there's very little appetite from Western nations to provide competence in the arena. So the sort of gold-plated solution of having Western air power is not there. Just giving jets, I'm afraid, is a little naive. These things, exactly as we've been discussing it, they are incredibly complex. They're very expensive, huge logistics tails. So, but I do think one of the things that's interesting about the diplomatic language about this, if you go back, most Western nations were reluctant to give tanks some time ago.
Mm.
The UK government stepped forward, offered 14 Challenger 2s. That unlocked Europe, talking about Leopard 2s, and then the America was happy to follow on as well. And I do think there's part of the language here, which is British government hasn't committed jets, but it has talked about providing fighter jet training, and we can unpack what we think that looks like. Which doesn't mean we're suddenly going to send jets to Ukraine, but I do think it walks us just one step further down the path that eventually air power might well be something in some form or another that the West is able to provide a decisive capability for Ukraine.
I mean, do you think then, Sean, just from what you've said there, that there has been, I suppose, pardon the pun, sort of mission creep in terms of what's ended up happening, and that it is inevitable that we will give more and more and more?
I wouldn't describe it as mission creep. I think, and again, Lord Derek's probably better placed to answer some of this than myself. I do sense that at the start of this campaign, Western nations were nervous about whether Ukraine would have the courage, the tenacity, the stoicism to withstand Russian onslaught. I mean, let's face it, Ukrainian is other David to the Russian Goliath. But actually, the Ukrainians have done an amazing job. Then it was a question of whether, if Western support was provided on the defense, like anti-tank weapons, could it slow the Russian advance and perhaps even start to push it back? But of course, now that Ukraine has proven itself to be resilient, providing Ukraine the tools to expel the Russian invaders, now it's a different set of equipment. So tanks really are an offensive weapon. They can punch holes in the enemy's front line, and that's undoubtedly how Ukraine will intend to use them. And what's interesting is, well, the dynamics on the battlefield is that Russia, if rumours are to be believed, seems to be starting its spring offensive already. And the weather conditions are not suitable for that. They're being rushed into this decision because they're clearly concerned from a military perspective about the arrival of decisive Western tanks. And that, therefore, all has an impact on the
Okay.
psychology of the Russian forces.